collaboration with the Cyprus Mail, this is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
Coming up on the programme this week, as the successful candidates received their Duke of Edinburgh's Gold Awards last week, we'll discuss at length with the head of the international branch of the scheme how it helps prepare young people for adult life.
But if they don't have the opportunity to push those boundaries just a little bit, then when they enter the workplace, they just won't be properly prepared to be able to make the decisions that they'll need to make for the rest of their lives.
And we'll look in detail at the ramifications of the Co-op Bank in Cyprus. It's been headline news for the last couple of weeks. Is the saga finally over? And does it mean that people who have defaulted on their loans are going to get help from the government?
One thing that surprises me in all of this is no one has suggested that one of the ways you could pay back your loan is to move out of your enormous villa that you bought 2 years ago into something that's actually closer to the size of your household and to your pocket.
Last week, the British High Commission hosted an awards ceremony for the gold winners of the Duke of Edinburgh's awards. At the reception was John May. He's the Secretary-General of the Duke of Edinburgh's International Awards, and he explained what they were.
Well, the Duke of Edinburgh's International Award is really a framework for what we call non-formal education. It's everything that we'd like young people to have the opportunity to do outside the classroom to help them to prepare themselves and equip themselves for adult life.
So it's really lessons in life.
That's a good way of describing it. Lessons in life, but importantly, lessons that young people control themselves. So what we ask young people to do is to think about experiences in 4 different areas, because we think, and employers and other people tell us, that if you have experience in these 4 areas, you develop the skills and the behaviours and attitudes that properly prepare you. And those 4 areas are really simple. The first is about giving service to the community, because we think that if you understand something about what your fellow human beings are doing, then you're likely to have more empathy as you grow up. Secondly, physical recreation. Bit of sport helps a healthy body and a healthy mind. Thirdly, some kind of skills development. And that could be anything from motorcycle maintenance through to learning to play a musical instrument, but finding something that is truly your passion. And then the 4th piece, which is what every young person remembers, is something we call the adventurous journey. And that's where a group of young people together plan and implement an expedition of some kind. Normally on foot, normally carrying everything that they need, sleeping out under the stars, making mistakes, losing themselves using their maps, and learning an enormous amount about leadership in the process.
Very interesting that you said making mistakes, because there has been a change in the way education takes place over the last, 15, 20 years or so, where we try not to let kids fail. And I personally think that that's a real mistake, because if they do fail, they can learn from the failure how to do it better next time. Is that part and parcel, particularly of the last thing that you mentioned?
I think you're absolutely right. And I think there's also something there around managing risk. You know, there is a real danger, particularly in the Western world, that we are growing a generation of young people who have been wrapped in cotton wool since they were driven in their parents' 4x4 to play date when they were 4 years old. And the worry for me is that young people are growing up in an environment where they haven't had the opportunity to make mistakes. They haven't had the opportunity to fall over and discover that if you run too fast in the playground, you will trip and you will end up with a knee that's grazed.
To take risks, basically, because if they're going to go into a business community, for example, that's all about taking risks.
Absolutely. But importantly, it's about taking risks within a managed environment. And so if we look at the expedition, for instance, that the young people do as part of their Duke of Edinburgh's International Award, it's very, very carefully supervised and assessed by expert adult leaders, and they're adult leaders who understand how much freedom to give young people to make decisions for themselves, and when things might be getting to the edge of safety and therefore they need to step in. Parents should always be reassured that our first priority is about young people's safety. But if they don't have the opportunity to push those boundaries just a little bit, then, as you say, when they enter the workplace, they just won't be properly prepared to be able to make the decisions that they'll need to make for the rest of their lives.
Now, this is something, I mean, you're the international manager, so this is something that was born in the UK, but it is now available pretty well all over the world, I think. Potted history of the Duke of Edinburgh's award as himself turns what? I mean...
He's 97.
And still an adventurer, given the opportunity or the physical ability.
I think so. The potted history is really simple. 1956, His Royal Highness realised that he was going to be spending the rest of his life 3 paces behind Her Majesty the Queen, and that he had the opportunity to do something really special in terms of the role that he was now to play. And he looked around and remembered the experience that he'd had at school. He'd had an extraordinary education with an amazing educator called Kurt Hahn, who was a Jewish emigre, or indeed refugee, from Germany, and who'd set up a school in the north of Scotland. And Philip had been there. Gordonston School. And Gordonston's whole philosophy was around recognising that not all learning goes on in the classroom. That actually getting out with some adventure, learning to serve other people, developing the skills perhaps for very academic young people, learning skills with your hands was something that was a really useful thing to do. And so what Prince Philip did was he invited schools and youth organisations together and said to them, why don't we create a framework that all of you could use in your different organisations that would be the same basic framework, whether you were a Boy Scout, as they were called in those days, whether you were at the most impressive selective school, whether you were in prison, or whether you were perhaps going to a local youth club. It would be the same for everyone. Originally, it was just for boys. 18 months later, girls quite rightly said, what about us? And since then, it's just grown and grown and grown. Started in the UK, grew very quickly around the Commonwealth, and then grew further and further, to the point that we are now in more than 130 countries and territories around the world, and any one week there will be 1.3 million young people undertaking their award. And what's exciting is every single one of those programmes is different, because each young person, with the help of an adult leader, decides what their pathway through the award programme will be. So I did it when I was a young person, and I know that the experience I had was genuinely unique. And for the young people that we're meeting tonight and giving their gold awards to, bronze, silver and gold at the different levels, they have managed to achieve something that is really remarkable for young people. They should be dead proud of themselves. I'm proud of them.
John May, the Secretary-General of the Duke of Edinburgh's International Awards, talking to me last week at the British High Commission about the award ceremony for this year's gold winners.
In collaboration with the Cyprus Mail, this is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
The biggest achievement of Crime Stoppers has been the ability of the public to be able to give information about crime anonymously.
There's no way I could have kept prostituting without the drugs. There's no way I could have had my body used like a public toilet, because that's actually what prostitution is.
And then the 4th series I started 3 days after I'd won the Oscar, so the whole of the Monarch of the Glen experience was all interplatted with the Gosford Park Oscar experience.
I was working with Ronnie James Dio, and David was going to reformed Whitesnake in 2003.
Cyprus was chosen because Cyprus is a stable, peaceful and secure place.
We have to really look closely. What are we doing with children? What are we doing with adolescents? And what are we doing with adults that can help them move into a more literate situation?
The ones that I'm proudest of are the ones that were true discoveries, where we found something we didn't know existed.
And staying with those Duke of Edinburgh awards, also at the reception was the operations manager for Cyprus and Western Europe for the scheme. He is James Moore, and he explained what his job entailed.
The way that this part of the award is set up is that it's mainly in independent schools, and the independent schools act as independent award centres. So rather than like in the UK where it's a national authority that deals with everything, these are independent units scattered around various countries in Europe. So they're quite isolated, and what I do is I link them together, I support them with their questions, their difficulties, I help them out with all sorts of information like that.
So what's the setup in Cyprus?
The setup in Cyprus is that it's not a national authority, it is a country where we have lots of independent centres. So,
wouldn't it be better if it was a national thing and everybody was getting, yes, the different types of awards, but through a central authority?
Well, yes and no. What a national authority is able to do is to expand the reach of the award into areas where people are not or are more disadvantaged, maybe. But what it needs a strong central authority to be set up with people who want to run it in that way. It needs funding, it needs all sorts of bureaucratic backup to be able to do that. At the moment, Cyprus is not in that position, as many countries are not. For example, France is not, and Spain. There are many countries like this.
It does seem a shame to me that it is very much in the private schools in Cyprus, and I know for a fact that I've met one or two kids in the Cypriot government schools who have, off their own bat, signed up for a DOE award because they really regret it's not available in their school.
Absolutely. The more people that we can get involved, the better for everybody. There is a light at the end of the tunnel, if you like, in that the Cyprus Scouts have recently restarted their licence. So there's another outlet other than in the private school. But yes, extending the reach of the award is something that is very important to us.
How can you help Cyprus do that? Because I'm sure, since you're familiar with the country, that you know volunteering, for example, is not high on the agenda here, particularly, again, in the local schools.
Well, it's becoming better. Certainly, some of the things that the young people come up with doing in their service section often surprise you and delight you, really. So there are people within the community that have this desire to volunteer and act for service. As far as setting up a national award to deal with the entire country, there are obviously some political difficulties within Cyprus, and I don't know how we're going to solve those, just as Cyprus doesn't seem to know how they're going to solve them either. So that's the situation we have at the moment.
James Moore, Operations Manager for Cyprus and Western Europe for the Duke of Edinburgh Awards.
This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
Well, the headline news for the past week or more has been what's going to happen to the cooperative bank in Cyprus. There's been a run on the bank of some billion, I think, in the first 4 months of the year. People, of course, harking back to the haircut of 2013. Well, it seems that after a special session of Parliament on Sunday, the bills that the government proposed have gone through. What do they mean? At a first glance, it suggests that actually it might pay you in Cyprus to default on your mortgage. I'm sure there's more to it than that, which is why we've invited Fiona Mullen from Sapienta Economics to deconstruct exactly what this is going to mean both for the shareholders in the co-op, for the taxpayer, and for those depositors and defaulting mortgagers. So, Fiona, what is going to happen? Because it's not clear to me at all what these bills actually encompass.
Right, so there are actually 6 bills in total, and I think none of them specifically related to that co-op deal. But let's talk about what the co-op deal is about. Essentially, the thing that everyone's been talking about in the past week is this what's called SDA programme, which is supposed to be a programme for helping the so-called vulnerable borrowers. And there are a couple of criteria for you to be eligible for this. And one of the things everyone's noticing is, hang on a minute, you seem to actually have to be fairly wealthy to be eligible. So one of the criteria is your household income needs to be under 50,000 a year. Well, 50,000 is quite a lot of money.
It's a lot more than an awful lot of my friends get, so yes.
What I'm told by government officials is that the average household income is higher than 50,000. But I haven't found any official data on that. They must mean gross income, i.e. income before tax, because if you look at the net income, which is the only public statistics available, it's a lot less. But if you're earning less than 50,000 as a household, so let's say if it's 2 parents and so on, and some other slightly complicated formula to do with the value of the asset of your house, blah, blah.
The house has to be worth less than 350,000.
Yes.
Now, if you look at the way property is advertised these days, it's about on the border of what most things are over 250, maybe not quite up to 350, but that doesn't make you destitute, does it?
No. And in fact, if you look at the RICS data, the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, houses might be around 350,000, but a lot of people live in apartments and they're more like 150, 180 something. So it does seem to be extraordinarily generous. However, even just applying these 2 criteria has apparently cut the number of eligible people from 32,000 to 15,000. So the government is convinced that only 15,000 people will be eligible for this.
And what will they get?
What they get is essentially the taxpayer pays off 1/3 of their loan. So 1/3 gets paid by the taxpayer. The bank may, and again depending on other criteria, knock off another 20%, and then they pay the rest. So about half of their loan is paid by somebody else. It slightly depends. So if you've got into a situation where, let's say, you owe 100,000 and your property's only worth 50,000, that's when you get eligible to have the value of your loan cut. If you owe 100,000 but your property's worth 150,000, then you don't get that cut. You just get the 1/3 paid by the government. You don't get the...
Which is not bad.
Yeah. But as you rightly say, it's the real question here is the whole moral hazard thing. I mean, a lot of people, and we don't know who and we don't know how many, have been taking advantage of the fact that we have a very slow judicial system. We didn't really have a very good system for going after people's other property if they're not paying on their home. And so, is this ultimately just encouraging everybody not to pay their debts?
Well, that's the way it looks, to be honest with you. I mean, if you look around, this follows on from years of amnesties on illegal holiday apartments, for example, amnesties on all sorts of other things, and amnesties even now on tax defaulters.
Yeah.
So are we just encouraging people to try and sidestep the law? Shouldn't we be trying to show that people who don't abide by the law are not at an advantage over those who do pay their taxes, are repaying their mortgages? Because where does the responsibility lie if you take out a loan knowing you can't repay it? Now, the banks are at fault to a degree if they haven't conducted due diligence to see that you can repay. So, yes, they're at fault to a degree, but surely you don't take out a loan you know you can't repay because you want to buy a new Mercedes.
Mm-hmm. I mean, one thing that surprises me in all of this is no one has suggested that one of the ways you could pay back your loan is to move out of your enormous villa that you bought 2 years ago into something that's actually closer to the size of your household and to your pocket.
Sell the big one, buy the small one, and pay off your mortgage on the big one.
I mean, there's been no suggestion which is the kind of thing that would happen in other countries, let's say.
Having said that, how far is this to do with particularly this government, but I think many other governments we've seen in the past few years, trying to support developers and the construction industry? Because they're creating a problem in the market, are they not, by doing that?
I think, to be honest, we've got to wait and see. These laws you mentioned before that were passed in Parliament, they were supposed to tighten up on foreclosures and insolvencies. There hasn't been a lot of information out there about exactly what was in them, but what I've found out so far doesn't seem to be that much different. So, for example, they've changed the period between which, if your house has to go for auction and it doesn't succeed in the first one, you can now do it again in a much shorter period. I don't know how much difference that's going to make.
The difference might be the fact that I think I read online that they will be doing e-auctions, because if you recall, several months ago, when there was a public auction, there were so many demonstrators there saying, hands off our homes. Right. Even if somebody wanted to go and bid, they weren't going to do it.
Yeah, no, that's actually true. Yeah, so e-auctions was part of it, plus they got rid of this reserve price idea. So theoretically, the property can go for 30% of its value if there's a buyer. So,
as long as the bank accepts that?
Yeah, I'm guessing, yes, yeah. And then there was, the only thing I could spot on the insolvency was that the insolvency practitioners are going to get a bigger cut than they would do last time, somehow to incentivise them.
So what does that mean?
I'm not sure those laws themselves will make a difference. I think what will make a difference is they're already hiring more judges for financial-related cases. And that's been one of the biggest obstacles, is that everybody knows that if you get sued, it's going to take 10 years before anybody will come after you anyway. So the idea that this might happen much faster hopefully will act as an incentive. But I think it is a bit of a, it shouldn't have come to this, but I think in the circumstances the government had to come up with a solution really fast, and this was the best it could come up with in order to get the support of Zico and so on.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that, because a lot of the parties in Parliament were dead against this full stop. Mm-hmm. They weren't even going to consider it. What would have been the scenario if it hadn't gone through?
I think we would have a domino effect. So first of all, the co-op would collapse, and potentially, and again this is a bit unclear, potentially even deposits under 100,000 would be just gone. And if you hadn't sorted out the co-op, then Hellenic would be next, and then Bank of Cyprus next. So it was a very serious situation, and really caused by the regulators in Frankfurt turning around and saying, apparently overnight, turning around and just saying, sorry guys, you've run out of time. You've got to do something now.
Well, in fairness, it's been going on for how many years, Fiona?
I mean, this is where, because I have to confess, even in my own analysis, I was saying, OK, well, co-op's got quite a healthy capital ratio. It was 15%, and it only had to have something like 9.5%.
Yeah, but the non-performing loans were a big problem,
yeah,
weren't they?
But it was cutting loans as well. I think it cut them by about 20%. Bank of Cyprus has managed to cut them by about 40%, and so on. So the co-op had started later than the other banks, but it was also, it had to turn itself from 90 plus into a single bank and so on. So what is less clear, so that the sceptics, let's say, will tell you the banks and the government have known this for ages. They were just doing what ACL did last time and wait until after the election. So they knew this was coming, they should have fixed it before. The kind of reading is they didn't quite know how bad it was going to be, and then suddenly they had to do something right now. But to kind of go back to your earlier question, this problem has been created by the MPs because they delayed and they delayed and they delayed on the first foreclosure laws. They didn't pass until, was it late 2014 or something?
And then they watered them down before they passed.
Then they watered them down, and as a result, the big powerful regulator, the single supervisory mechanism, has turned around and said this isn't good enough, do better. And they may yet do that again. They may look at these laws and say, come on guys, this isn't working, and you need to do
How can we measure if it's working finally?
What we will see is, actually one of the important bills that was passed, one that's been pending for ages and ages, it's been in every IMF and EU report, is the ability for the banks to package up a bunch of loans and sell them to whoever wants them.
Now that I don't understand. What do those people do with them?
Well, you're sort of, it's a kind of vulture type fund, you know, that's why they were avoiding it. So they'll come to the developer and they'll say, I see you've got a whole bunch of property that you're in debt for 100 million for, I'll give you 20 million. And then they either sit on that property and they make 10 million out of it in 10 years' time when it's gone up, or, you know, so it's people betting on the future of the property market, in a sense. And
what impact is that going to have on the very many developers who are in a dodgy situation and have been for years? And what impact will it have on the property market?
Well, the interesting thing that the government has taken on so much of the debt itself, so 6.5 billion of the Hellenic bank stuff, some of that will be SDA, the programme for the so-called vulnerable. So the government's going to be sitting on a lot of property. I think it's not going to be in a hurry to sell that, because it doesn't desperately need to get that money back today. So that's good in a way. There's a whole bunch of property that won't be flooding the market. What is less clear, is the developer property. How fast will that be going into the market? I mean, of course, at the moment, as you probably know, Limassol is booming because of all the passport business and stuff. It's really all a bit uncertain at the moment. I mean, will this be enough to incentivise people to pay back their debts? Will it really fix the developer loans? And if not, does that mean we're going to see a lot of flooding of property into the market? And will it be enough? Are Hellenic and Bank of Cyprus out of the woods yet? We still don't know. So it's still all a bit up in the air, I think.
I have a feeling we'll be talking to Fiona again in a couple of months' time when we see how all of this pans out. But if you're confused, well, I think I am too. We've been talking to Fiona Mullen from Sapienta Economics about the unravelling of the co-op in Cyprus and what impacts it may have both for the property market, the banks and, of course, the taxpayer.
Listen online to the Cyprus News Digest on YouTube or at cyprusmail.libsyn.com. The latest program is uploaded every Friday, and if you missed one, you can catch up there.
In other news this week, the Ombudsman's Office presented a code of conduct that they've prepared to deal with sexual harassment within the civil service. Ombudswoman Maria Lotidis said that she was currently looking into 8 sexual harassment cases which have been pending since 2015. She said it was time to protect civil servants falling victim to sexual harassment. The presentation was also attended by Labour Minister Zita Emilianidou, and it was agreed that both men and women, regardless of their employment status, deserved protection. The text is also a guide for the government as the employer to take immediate measures, it says, to avert acts that constitute harassment and victimisation of those who may report such behaviour. It was stressed that harassment at work is a disciplinary offence and that no one should have to tolerate such behaviour. The code of conduct in question concerns the civil service, but an effort is underway to prepare one also for the private sector. And the Interior Ministry has said it needs to create a second reception centre for the increasing number of asylum seekers and refugees arriving on the island. The government is looking for European help for this after a response to a letter from MEP Dimitris Papadakis, who described the current living conditions at the Kofino reception centre as vile, and the EU Commissioner responsible, Dimitris Avramopoulos, said the Cypriot authorities were in contact for assistance in improving the quality of the island's asylum seeker system. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.